That's my mom says.
Mic check 1 2. Mic check. Mic check 1 2. Mic check. Mic check 1 2. Mic check. Mic check 1 2. Hiyo mic inakaaje? Asante. Hiyo ni yako. Hii ndio watu wataongea. They'll be speaking here. Yes, yes.
All right. Good morning once again, colleagues. I think it's time we kick this off. We are 16 minutes late, according to our program. And my suggestion is that we have this even as we touch in the breakfast. We are gathered here. First, I must thank you for honoring our invite, for being here with us this morning, and for allowing us to grab your time to participate in this very, very important conversation. Climate finance was the focus of the Baku talks, if you followed them. Of course, developing countries were asking for about $1.3 trillion. They ended up getting about $300 billion. And that $300 billion is not immediate. It's going to come after 10 years. What they are saying, though, is that at least they carved a pathway to the 1.3 trillion. We was with some of you in Baku. We did a lot of lobbying for the 1.3 trillion. But what we realized was that a lot of people, and especially those in the global north, still do not understand why the global south countries are asking for 1.3 trillion. They don't understand. They believe that we should be funding our mitigation and adaptation process. But we, on the other hand, are saying that this is not our mess. You created this mess. I think Africa contributes to about 3%, 3 to 4% of global carbon. And therefore, Africa is saying that this is not our mess, this is your mess. The reason that why it's flooding is because of the mess in the global north, not because of your own mess. And therefore, that push and pull between the global south and the global north illustrates why the matter of climate finance is very, very important. But it's not just about finance, it's about development. If you've been following the debate, especially on sovereign debt, you've noticed that a lot of people are saying that African countries are spending a disproportionate amount of the budget financing climate-related issues. So we are carving out funds from health, from education, from infrastructure to fund issues that are related to climate crisis. And those might be things that are urgent, especially with floods and roads are washed away and so on and so forth. But it might be other things when we have to set aside a few billions to feed people because of climate catastrophes and so on and so forth. And therefore, when that money is taken from our coffers to go build another who was washed away by slavery or to feed starving families and so on and so forth, and still, you're forced to take a loan or loans to fund those projects, it becomes a twin problem. And that's the reason we are gathered here. We have in our midst some of the most respected people in the space. We are expecting the special envoy for climate change, Mr. Ali Mohammed, to join us. He's in another meeting, but he's on his way here. But we have respected people in that space. And I want to start by inviting the CEO of the Kenya Leaders Guild to set the stage for us. Karibu sana.
Thank you very much. We can applaud Mwinzi. Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
All right. Thank you very much for coming to this meeting of Kenya Editors Guild. Even as we start, kindly allow me to establish protocols of our guests. Dr. Mohammed Ali, the Special Envoy for Climate Change, will be joining us shortly. Peter Odengo, who is the Senior Policy Advisor on Climate Change at the National Treasury. Dr. Mithika Mwenda, who is the Director of the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance. The President of Kenya Editors Guild, Senior Editors, distinguished members of the Kenya Editors Guild, members of the press present, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It is our pleasure to welcome you to this edition of the Credible Voices series, or the Thought Leadership series. And this is a series that is undertaken in partnership with the Bill and Melinda Gates. And the aim really is to help to bring out outcomes, development outcomes in health, in the agriculture sector, in technology, to allow media to be able to report better on these issues. So in the past cycle of the Thought Leadership series, we have had discussions in the agriculture sector, and we have also had a session exploring medical outcomes, where we spoke about cervical cancer. And really the aim is to allow media to better understand these issues and to report better and to ask questions. So in this second cycle, the Guild aims at advancing public understanding of agriculture, climate change, science, and technology issues. And that is why we came up with this segment. That is why we invited the thought leaders in the area of climate change, climate finance, to help us to bridge the gap, to help us to understand issues in the development finance for equitable progress. And that's why we are gathered here today. And we are glad that we have experts in the room who will help us to who will shed light to the issues surrounding development finance, as has been laid, as the scene has already been set by Mwinzi. So the key questions we would be asking include what needs to be done. First of all, what are the issues on the table? We have the expert from the National Treasury, where the FLOCA is domiciled. We would like to understand issues concerning how the money is dispersed, because I had a journalist tell him that when we see you, we see money, right? But we need to be able to understand how that money, where that money is, first of all, how it is brought on board. Are we doing enough to let communities know that there is a pot available specifically for them? Because, and Dr. Othengo will tell us more about what he does, because he said his work is to mobilize those resources. Are we reporting enough about those resources when they are already mobilized? So that is the topic that we have on board today. We would need to know how much the developed world should pay for emissions contributions, because in all the Conference of Parties deliberations that we have, we always understand that Africa's voice needs to be heard better, because Africa is the least polluter but the most disadvantaged. So in this meeting today, we hope that we will be able to understand how the climate change finance relates to the low and middle income countries, where Kenya and most of the sub-Saharan African countries belong, and the issues at policy level relating to climate finance, and how best we can tap in as editors and as reporters into this discourse. Kenya Editors Guild holds or drives change through various ways, and this is one of those ways, through bringing on board key policy makers to discuss key policy decisions, issues happening at the ground, which we may not be aware of. So we are glad that our guests, that our experts, and that you also responded to the invite, so that we come and understand, so that we are able then to report better. We also hope that from this discourse today, once we are grounded and have learned quite a bit about climate finance, then we will be able then to partner with institutions such as PACJA, institutions such as the National Treasury, to be able to carry out sensitization meetings in the counties in the name of town hall meetings or community village halls, where we can organize sessions with community people to be able to allow them to understand that there is money domiciled in the communities for them, and then how they would be able to make use of that money. So with those few remarks, I would like to say thank you very much, and we look forward to a great learning experience, a great learning session, and great deliberations as well. Back to you, Bernard.
Thank you very much, Rosalia. Yeah, it's indeed important that we keep having these conversations, and it's indeed important that we keep learning from each other, because we understand the gaps that we have, the needs that we have, and when we have experts in the room, then things can only get better for us. So, you know, as Rosalia has said, we have the technical experts. We have, you know, some of the biggest names in journalism in the space, and some of the biggest names in the civil society in the room as well. And now I wish to invite my president of the Kenya Editors Guild, Zubeida Kananu, to give her remarks. Karibu sana. Madam President.
Peter Odengo, Senior Policy Advisor on Climate Change at the National Treasury. Dr. Mithika Mwenda, Director, PACJA. Asanteni sana for being here this morning. Colleagues, good morning. Good morning. Muko salama? I remember during AMC, this is one conversation that most of us were struggling with, especially when we listened to the experts, the jargon they were using. You know, we felt like this is one area that is too complex, you know, where by the end of the day, the audience expects you to tell the story when you don't even understand what is being said. I remember each one of us was asking one another, okay, what is this carbon credit thing? What is this? Like the stuff we were talking about, you know? And that's what took us to the drawing board. And we felt like, as Kenya Editors Guild, we have a responsibility to ensure that our people, our journalists, our editors, understand this monster so that we are able to break down the story. And I'll touch on that later. Because we felt we have a huge responsibility in telling the story and changing the narrative, you know, because climate change is here with us. We've seen the effects. But how do we ensure that we sensitize the public on the same? So it's my pleasure to welcome you to this important forum where we seek to bridge climate and development finance for equitable progress. As we contribute to this vital discussion, we must approach it from the perspective of gatekeepers whose mandate is to ensure that the message is simplified, factual, and impactful so it resonates with our audiences, hence the manual that we developed, which we'll be showing you in a few minutes. Climate change reporting is a growing area of specialization that newsrooms must prioritize and allocate more resources towards. Reporting on climate change requires communicate research findings. A solid understanding of climate science helps journalists educate their readers, viewers, and listeners, empowering them to make informed decisions. This is why we are pleased to host this forum and deepen our knowledge on development finance. I don't know how many newsrooms represented here have the science desk where we report on climate change. Nation, I see a few hands. Do we have a budget towards that? Enabling our journalists tell the story and including, this includes personnel. How many people do we have? Do we have a dedicated team that is telling these stories? And how many are they? Have we prioritized this? Joe, you are the first to raise your hand. How many people do you have on your climate change science desk? How many is many? Do you have a budget for them?
Yes, but it's a long story.
And I believe it's a long story for all of us. Yes, we've established this desk, but you find like one person, two people on that desk who don't have a budget. And we only tell these stories based on events. When there's AMC, that's when we go big on climate change. When there's drought, when there's floods. Isn't that the case in our newsrooms? Like, would you come with a story on climate change today and it finds its way on the top stories in the bulletin? How often do we prioritize these stories? The silence in the room speaks volumes. So as the effects of climate change become more severe, African countries remain vulnerable, facing challenges such as food insecurity, water shortages, and extreme weather events. The role of media in this context cannot be overstated. The media must demystify climate finance mechanisms, explaining how resources are mobilized and used to support adaptation and mitigation efforts. Promote accountability by tracking how funds are allocated, especially from international commitments such as the Green Climate Fund and other financial instruments. And we had this conversation earlier with Odengo and Mithika. Highlight local solutions and amplify the voices of vulnerable communities, showcasing innovative approaches to resilience and adaptation. Advocate for climate justice by emphasizing the impact on marginalized communities and holding major polluters accountable. In this dialogue, we aim to explore practical solutions to scale up climate finance without compromising development investments. How can we, as editors and journalists, help audiences understand the complexities of climate finance while ensuring transparency and inclusivity in the process? One way to address these challenges is through continuous learning. As a specialized field, climate change reporting demands that journalists stay updated on emerging trends and technologies. I don't know how often we train our people. Editors must prioritize capacity building to empower reporters with the skills and knowledge to tackle topics such as loss and damage financing, how countries vulnerable to climate change impacts are compensated for irreparable losses. Energy transitions, balancing the need for sustainable energy with economic development. Carbon markets and trading, understanding their mechanisms, challenges, and implications for developing nations. Biodiversity and ecosystem services, linking these to climate resilience and economic sustainability. Earlier this month, Kenya Editors Guild launched a manual, I'll present it to you in a few minutes, on climate change reporting, which will soon be incorporated into the training programs of academic institutions. This is a step towards equipping journalists with the tools they need to inform the public effectively. And it reminds me also of a Swahili saying where we say, samaki mkunje angali mbichi. This is where you ask yourself, at what point do you start kunjaing this samaki? Would we start in the newsroom, or do we start at the academic institutions where we train them while it's still in school before they join the job market, so that when they join us in the newsrooms, or when they come after we exit the newsrooms, at least they are not starting from scratch. So that's why we felt like this manual needs to be domiciled in our academic institutions, so that they gain that knowledge before exiting the institutions and joining the job market. The outcomes of COP29 in Azerbaijan will motivate us to examine how the media can contribute to public understanding of the nexus between responsibility and mitigation. How can journalists track the obligations of key polluters while also covering the adaptation efforts of vulnerable communities? How can editors drive audience engagement to build awareness of climate goals and inspire action? The Finance Corp offers an opportunity to strengthen commitments, particularly for Africa, by ensuring promises are kept for the most vulnerable nations. Media must also play a pivotal role in this process by monitoring the implementation of climate finance agreements. I don't know whether this story is still alive in our newsrooms after COP, or it just died after COP. Encouraging global gap between policymakers and the public, encouraging global solidarity by highlighting shared responsibilities and the need for inclusive solutions. Beyond climate financing, allow me to highlight a few critical challenges facing the media that must also be addressed. Harnessing technology for climate reporting. This is a big monster in the room that we need to address. In this era of rapid technology advancement, journalists must leverage tools such as data visualization, satellite imagery, and artificial intelligence to enhance storytelling on climate and finance. These tools can make complex issues accessible to diverse audiences. 2, combating misinformation and disinformation. The rise of fake news, misinformation, and disinformation fueled by technological advancements threatens the credibility of climate reporting. Media houses must invest in fact-checking mechanisms and foster collaborations to counter these challenges. I know many of us are struggling with that, setting up the fact-checking desks and sustaining those desks. It's very expensive to run them, but we still need to invest, and I'm happy that we have Mr. Moneybags in the office, in the room today. Maybe we can have that conversation. He says there's a lot of money. It's us who have not asked for the money. So I'm happy he's here, he will guide us. And we've had this conversation since AMC. He says, nyinyi ndio hamjakujia pesa. So tunakujia hiyo pesa. 3, building ethical and professional standards. As climate finance and policy debates become more contentious, journalists must adhere to highest ethical standards to avoid being drawn in politicized narratives. 4, fostering collaboration across borders. Climate change is a global issue, and cross-border collaboration among journalists can help share insights, expose disparities, and amplify the stories of those most affected. In conclusion, the media has a critical role to play in bridging the gap between climate change, finance, and development. Let us commit to empowering ourselves and our audiences with the knowledge and tools needed to drive equitable process. Together we can amplify solutions, hold stakeholders accountable, and champion for the voices of the most vulnerable. How many of us were in Nakuru for the convention? How was the situation on the ground, particularly on climate change, effects of climate change? Remember, we went to Menengai Crater, we went to Lake Nakuru National Park. How was the situation on the ground? Or maybe some would ask, why did we choose Nakuru over these other beautiful counties in the country? Why did we choose Nakuru? Teopista, maybe you can.
I think to see for ourselves what the effects of climate change. And I think we had gone there much earlier in the year. Yeah, 2023. And we saw that, and I think it was important that the wider membership also has a first-hand experience. That's, of course, besides enjoying the scenery.
Yeah, and
then, of course, planting trees at the Menengai Crater. I think the experience, so that we see firsthand, and perhaps that then we can begin to talk about it.
Yeah, and tell the stories from an informed.
What we saw, I'm being asked, what did we see? Previously, I had heard about the water levels, the changing water levels, and I saw firsthand that the previous entrance to the park had been completely submerged by the water. Yes, so that means effect on the ecosystems, and of course the communities around have also been affected by that occurrence. Yeah, I think it's a phenomenon that really leaves us wondering: is it nature? Is it our activities, as they say? We have heard about greenhouse gases, but now this is the time we're beginning to feel those effects of climate change. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chipista. And this is what we are doing as Kenya Editors Guild, so that when we tell these stories, we tell them from an informed point of view, because we went there, we are told this used to be a tourist attraction site, but now it has been submerged, the trees are drying up, flamingos, like you can count them, you know, the numbers have decreased, the water levels have gone down, you know, and we asked ourselves, so what role do we have to play as journalists in changing the narrative? We were told about the existing conflict between KWS and their residents who want to fish. They're told you can't eat this fish because of the pollution. But they don't understand. They feel this is our lake, we need to fish, we need to make money out of it. So there's a lot happening on the ground, and that's why we feel we need to tell this story. We need to keep these stories alive. We don't have to wait for the events for us to tell these stories. So yes, we have the manual for training. So other than capacity building, we just want to experience also as journalists. Because we are not just storytellers, but we also feel we have a role to play in changing the current situation on the ground. Because we too are affected, you know? Yeah, so because we go back, from the newsroom, we go back to the society. So, and that's why we're having these conversations to see how do we hold each other's hands to change the current situation, because it's really getting out of hand. Some people say, sahizi kunafaa kuwa kuna mvua mpaka December. Where did the mvua disappear to? You know, where sometimes it's too hot, unashanga, okay, Mungu tumekukosea wapi? So I'm happy that you made time to be here this morning for us to have this conversation. And by the time we leave, we have possible solutions to the effects of climate change, and also this conversation on financing, you know, and that's, we appreciate the guests that we have today. Mtufungue macho, tusaidiane, tuendelee kushirikiana. So thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to this conversation. Asanteni.
Thank you very much, Madam President. You raised some pertinent issues, and you asked the hard questions about capacity, about whether we have the resources, both material and human, to report this. And you also ask a question about whether we really understand the urgency of the climate crisis. Because this is no longer something in the horizon. I remember when we started reporting about this, we didn't even understand it. And it was always something that it's coming, it's in the horizon. But now we are saying it's here. The question is, have we shifted our focus to understanding that this crisis is urgent and it's here with us? You also raised questions about newsrooms and whether they are equipped, whether editors are equipped with the knowledge and the resources as well to report this. And whether we, as we are building these skills, we are developing really, really professional cohorts who can report on climate change as well as they should. Topista also tells us that it's in our doors, you know, it's everywhere where we look. It's everywhere. I was talking to somebody the other day, and they told me that they suspect that their harvests this season are going to be depressed. Yeah, the rains have failed. Where are the rains failing? Farmers no longer understand when to plant their crop. Yeah, they no longer understand, and we know the crisis is here. And it's of monumental proportions. The fact that, you know, you're going to have depressed harvests means that you start January on empty stomachs, and means the cost of food is going to go up, and so on and so forth. If the rains fail, the cost of electricity and all these other things go up. And that has a bearing as well on what we do with our lives much, much later on. That then brings us to speaker number 3, who takes over from the president of the Guild. His name is Joe Ageo, my senior and mentor in this space. And he's going to take us through an inside take of what journalists are doing or could do better to tell this story. Karibu, Joe.
Thank you very much. I don't know whether I should have this. Is this okay? I should keep this?
Yes, yes.
Okay. I must say that I would really have loved to stay throughout this to have this conversation, but I'm going to even rush through what I'm saying because I have to leave at 11. So I came across an interesting quote when I was thinking about this meeting, and this quote says, some two gentlemen in Sweden who've written a book about conversations around climate change, and they say partaking in the global climate policy debate in the 21st century is like stepping into a dimly lit room where people are screaming at each other. Voices bounce off walls and ricochet back towards the center from different directions. In that cacophony, it is difficult to perceive any sense of urgency, importance, or significance. In many respects, it would be rational to hold our hands to our ears, urgently seek out a corner, and wait for silence. If it were not for the increasingly clear screams that a fire is burning in the basement and all exits are blocked. Then they talk about the patterns of the argument being being confusing and all of that. I got into this conversation in the early 2000s, this whole climate change thing, and at that point, it was a lot of the science of climate change. There was a lot of debate that time actually, whether this was in fact happening, and if it was, whether human beings were responsible for it. And that conversation went on. In 2005, I think it should have been August, we have, it was called Hurricane Katrina. Many of people would remember that. If you are not born, it is fine. You'll hear about it today. But then after Katrina happens, and then in 2006, there were also a number of things. And by the way, many people in this room might know that in 2006, we had the COP in Nairobi, right? At that point, many of us covered climate change. Well, I should say few of us, because it was countable like this. You could count, right? And so there are many people who are in this town but didn't even realize something important was happening in Nairobi, COP12, that happened in 2006. But that same year, climate change was actually designated as one of the most important terminologies of that year, in 2006, because that's the year also, later in the year, when Al Gore had Inconvenient Truth, a film that many people resonated with, that tried to go beyond the science of climate change to demonstrate that these things were interlinked and that people's lives were actually being affected by this phenomenon. And Katrina then dramatized that the previous year. In 2006 also, there was a report that I'm sure Peter Odengo, and by the way, you should tell everybody how to pronounce your name, not Odengo, by a gentleman called Lord Nicholas Stern. And this report kind of looked at now the economic costs of climate change, and that became a big point of conversation. That same year again, there was the IPCC fourth assessment report. Those who cover climate change will understand what this is, but these are periodic reports that are produced by a group of scientists, 2,000 plus of them from around the world, and they said many things that had been said before, but then they confirmed, they had a 90% plus chance in that report that said this was being caused by human beings. So then the conversation began to advance in that way. And so when you think about how we report on climate change, as editors in the room, we need to understand the global context in which this is happening, because this thing starts as a scientific conversation and all of that. And I think most of the world thought that this could be sorted out the same way the world had dealt with many other risks before. That, we just needed to have better regulation, we just needed for people to be better informed about the choices they were making, we needed to just have more economic growth, we needed to do more research and those kinds of things. And that would sort it out. But then it soon became evident that climate change was a lot bigger than that. But then there was economic growth that needed to happen. Industries were still coming up and that sort of thing. And so there were all these ideas that, yes, maybe the economy, technology, let's get all these other renewable renewable sources of energy and all of these things to try and sort this thing. In the international level, there were all these things like clean development mechanism that came out of Kyoto Protocol in 2005 and so on. And then increasingly, you start hearing people like my friend Midhika Mwenda, I almost called him, Midhika Mwenda, talking about climate justice. I was with him in, I think it should have been COP19, and they had a group of people that said, climate justice now. Why? Because climate change has suddenly become a justice question. And this is what I think many of us were referring to, that how is it that some other people have caused the problem elsewhere, and we are here picking the tab, we're here bearing the greatest brunt. And so as we think about this as journalists, how much of that justice frame comes through in our conversations, in our stories, in the stories that we publish. Because climate change now, more than ever before, has been demonstrated to be more of a justice question. Now you find the conversations getting louder about this being part of a generally unequal international system that forces people in this part of the world to go and borrow money to rebuild some place that has been destroyed by floods that can be traced to the direct impacts of climate change. So if you begin to see the injustice in that, then our stories begin to have a soul, that it is not just some scientific phenomenon that is happening around the world. If you talk to farmers in Kajiado, where I live, the livestock keepers, they will tell you they used to know. It was almost clockwork, like they know when they need to take their cows to Wundani or someplace because it's going to be dry, then they know when to bring them back. But now they can't tell when the rains will come, when they will fail. The guys who plant maize somewhere in the North Rift are in the exact same predicament. When I was growing up, my grandmother would plant the maize and then 3 days the rains would come because they kind of looked at everything around, I don't know, some birds or some, they had a way of telling and it would come exactly the way they had thought. So as we think about this as people who are in the communication space, I think we need to, one, contextualize this conversation in the manner that I've tried to do in 5 minutes. I wish I had more time. But a couple of things jump out for me, and one of them is how we frame this conversation. I've talked about the different ways through which this has been looked at over the years, but one of the most important frames that are coming through is this divide that's always there between the global south and the global north, but not just to keep it at that antagonistic level, but to really bring it down. What is really the injustice that we are talking about? And I've already tried to give some examples of that. There is the question of money that has been talked about. Mwinzi was talking about the 1.3 trillion that was supposed to come through in Baku, which did not, and some 300 billion that no one knows when it will come. But there's also 100 billion that I remember when I covered COP15, I think it was, in Copenhagen. And it was a big conversation then, but this is how many years later, there is still talk of where is the money, where is the money. But then even when there is money, I think as journalists we need to follow the money. I think Peter will be talking a lot about FLOCA, which I don't think a lot of journalists know about this money. That in fact he was telling me that there is some 200 million somewhere in my county. I don't know what it is doing. I don't know who has it. I don't know where it is hiding. But it's going to come and say all those things. And as journalists, we need to find out where is this money and where is it not. Okay? Loss and damage is something that has been talked about a lot. Then there's the question of I hear people now talk about climate colonialism. And I think you will hear a lot of that as discourses evolve, but it is really just a question of people who have caused the problem, but are still making it increasingly difficult for us to deal with the impacts. The monies are not coming, but we need to frame the monies. It's not a question of aid, it is not charity, it is a question of accountability. People basically cleaning up their mess, isn't it? There are issues that have also emerged where I think people have even talked about the green grab, where now a lot of things are happening in the name of ecological this and that. There are a lot of people who are being displaced, for example, from their land because of this or that green project that there isn't any accountability around. So how many things are happening in the name of green this, green that, that are in fact basically a camouflage for things that are a lot more nefarious. That means as journalists we have to have a different lens through which we see this and see through the greenwashing that can also happen. That is financing what they're calling a just or green or whatever transition. A lot of the resources that are coming from this continent. So there's a justice question around that, but there's also the idea that Africa is also the home of potential solutions to climate change, not just locally, but also on a global scale. What can be found here in Africa that can begin to solve the problem of climate change? What are Africans themselves doing? What are Kenyans themselves already doing that is trying to deal with this problem of climate change, so that we don't just wear the lenses of victims, people who are suffering. We've told the suffering story, and we've told it for many years, but we need to now be a bit more nuanced than that and say, what are the empowering narratives that can come? Because there's a thing that is developing that is called climate fatalism, where people say, this thing is too big, it's too bad, it is too serious, nothing is ever going to change. So we need to then start having empowering narratives that give agency to the African populations. Finally, to look at this as a system rather than just events. I think that if we connect the dots, it's the reason why I started with a bit of history of this thing. But if we connect the dots, then we will see every event in its proper context, so that our coverage is not episodic, that we wait for a COP, we wait for some report, we wait for all this, but we are able to connect the dots almost on a daily basis. Remember, climate change now, more than ever before, is interfacing with literally every sphere of life. It is in health, whether you're talking about the economy, the climate change dimension can be found there, whether you're talking about security, and everything that you can think about, you will find that there is a climate dimension that is either making it worse or causing it in the first place. And then for us as journalists to just develop the right vocabularies. Is it aid or is it reparations? Is it climate debt? Is it ecological justice? Those kinds of things that are empowering, but that give the proper context of what is going on. So for me, it's just to say that it gives me great joy as someone who's been covering these spaces for some time, to see the conversation getting into the mainstream, to see more journalists covering this, to see COPs getting better and more coverage over the years. Because I think that as journalists, we need to continually cultivate that space as editors, because that's the group that I'm most interested in this. We need to cultivate that space to encourage the young journalists who are getting into this space, educate ourselves so that we can understand what on earth is going on with this climate change, so that we build a pipeline, the new generation of climate journalists, so that this matter that used to be a fringe question that has now found itself right at the center of our lives will continue to get the kind of treatment it needs to get. It will have pride of place in the bigger scheme of things in our newsrooms, so that we can help the country, the continent, to put climate change in its proper context. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Joe. Thank you very much. I should bring to the attention of the room that we have our keynote speaker in the house, Ambassador Ali Mohammed is Kenya's Special Envoy for Climate Change. He's in the room. I'll give him a bit of time to catch his breath. He's come running from another meeting. So, karibu sana. Karibu sana. Joe has spoken about two things, in my opinion, that are very, very important. The first one is that the climate change story is a science one, but it's also an art one. The science being, we need to understand the science of climate change. And the art being, we need to know how to weave stories and narratives that tell that science story. He also says that we can't second guess on the science. Second guessing means we do not understand, we are following our hunches and so on and so forth. That we can't second guess on that science. That means we must understand it if we are to weave proper artistic narratives around climate change. The other very, very important question that he asks us is whether time has come now as journalists, as editors, and as communicators to foreground this story. And the question that we need to ask ourselves is, does it have to bleed to lead? Does the climate story have to bleed for it to lead? And I'm asking that because he says that our coverage of the climate crisis is often episodic. Episodic meaning we are either reporting it when there is a COP, when there is a major meeting, or when there is a major climatic catastrophe, where there are floods and people need to get relief food, they need to be evacuated, roads have been washed away, crops have failed, and so on and so forth. And therefore, at that moment, it's bleeding, and therefore it leads. But are there instances and are there opportunities for us as editors to foreground this story, even when there is no bleeding? And then lastly, is the issue of whether we give prominence to these stories. Is a climate change story likely to be the number one story in your bulletin, Madam Kanan? Is it likely to be? Is it likely to be the page one story on the Standard or the Daily Nation? I remember the first time I saw climate story on page one of any newspaper was in the Guardian of London, and they were reporting about the mass devastation of animals in the Tsavo Park, and they had this devastating, very powerful image of elephants lying in the Tsavo. And then much, much later on, as we started working on this and asking ourselves, can we make this story important? In the newsroom, we ask ourselves whether it's sexy enough to be on page one. Is it important? Is it nice? Does it sell? Will it attract audiences? Will it attract people on the streets? If it isn't, then we relegate it to the inner pages. But the question now is, has that time elapsed? And is it time we brought it to the front of our pages? I would like then to invite Dr. Mithika Mwenda. Mithika is the director of the Pan-Africa Climate Justice Alliance, and he works a lot in matters of supporting climate adaptation in Africa. This is important because a lot of us here have interacted with him as reporters and editors, and he'll give us insights into what he has seen us do and whether we are telling the adaptation story as powerfully as we should. Karibu sana.
Thank you, moderator. I think I will start first by picking from a quote, but not from what Joe Ageyo has done as quoted, but just from inside, from a lady just next to me who has said, we have been hearing about greenhouse gases, but it's now when we are feeling it. I think you have seen it. And so this is what really has been the biggest challenge, because we have taken, for a long time, we have perceived climate change as a very abstract subject, which is quite away from us. And that it has been mentioned, so episodic in reporting, that it becomes very difficult. And for me, the first time I saw the headline in a newspaper, now not in UK, but in Kenya, is during the Africa Climate Summit. So, and why was that? You may call it episodic, but we need to change. How do we report it so that it can be attractive? As we have seen, look at the newspapers which we have in Kenya. So most of them are commercial driven. So the first question somebody asks is, when I put this story, who will read it? Because, you know, it's about making money. It is making it really sensational. And I've always asked people, so we have like a press conference here led by the climate ambassador, Ali Mohammed. Very important story. And then we have a political rally out there about Gen Zs, and they are making noise and what. Which one will be captured in the front page? It's Gen Zs, isn't it? It's sensational because it is talking about some, I don't want to talk about names here. But definitely, that is what the media will capture. That will what it will appear in the newspapers. So these are some of the challenges we, in the climate space, who have been in this conversation for quite a while, has been grappling with. How then do we shape the narratives so that now we make it more human, we make it more attractive, we make it more topical, a topical issue, so that now it is not a far distance issue of reporting. Because it is this journalist, it is the median, which creates awareness, which sensitizes people about some of these narratives. For a long time, we have looked at climate change as an isolated subject of science and environment, and particularly in African countries. But go to a country like Netherlands, in Europe, and elsewhere, this is a purely developmental issue. In fact, climate change is not domiciled in all those countries in the environment ministry, the way we have done. At least now, I can tell you in Kenya we have made some milestones. But go in Netherlands, climate change is in the energy department. How do they see it? It's an energy issue. Germany, climate change is in the development, actually foreign affairs, development cooperation. That's how they see it. They are broadening it in Norway and those others. But us, we are still locked into those limited scope of environment and science without realizing that this is a public health issue, for instance. Why? When there are those floods or even when there is a lot of drought in northeastern, what images do you see? It is images of emaciated children and livestock dying. And what is that? Malnutrition. So that's a health of the people. It is as simple as that. Simplification, and demystification of the subject. But we are locked. We just leave the environment journalist to cover it. When we were in COP29, a friend of mine, Leon, he did a story. So no one was noticing within even our delegation and even in Kenya that we had journalists there until he did a story which was very interesting. He did a story like the delegates were concerned about food. Yes, suffering because there is no food. That is what grew. That was, I think, to me, that was very good because it attracted so many people. Oh, people are now suffering there because of food. And some of us even actually were even threatening him that we were exposing us that we are only driven by stomach. But that made you to really focus on that story that there are people following this thing. I think I find it creative of doing that. So we need how. I'm not saying that we were starving in that. No. I'm just giving you an example of sensational. It made it sensational because perhaps he was covering stories and they were going at the corner of the Nation newspaper. But here is a situation where everybody was calling me. We hope that you are not dying in COP29. So that's the creativity. I think if that is what we need, is sensational. We are not saying for no apparent reason. But more importantly, is really the evolution of the discourse on climate change, at not only at Kenyan level, but at global level. We are seeing it really more and more people talking about it. But what does that show you? It is how do we ensure that the policymakers grasp and make it an issue? How do we mainstream it in our short and long-term development strategy? At the current government, the KK government, in what we are calling the better. I hope you know better. Bottom-up transformation. I know most of you don't know. Yes, bottom-up transformation agenda. And you know, when we talk about that, Ovengo says, in fact, they learned from it. Because Floka is actually a manifestation of that. Though it started earlier, really, that is what we are talking about, bottom-up, pushing things from above. But that is it. So how do we ensure? You see, currently, give credit where it is deserved, the president is a passionate climate champion. And through that, we have seen really it really everywhere, in every ministry. We have a meeting in Manzon going on there. We are seeing those working, the Ministry of Finance is there, Ministry of Water, Ministry of Agriculture, all ministries. So that is actually what it requires, that political, political goodwill to ensure that now, and because if as president stops here, and when he hosted the Africa Climate Summit, you see that is how we were able to, when he spoke and brought those other top leaders, that's how we were able to get climate change into the headlines of the two main newspapers. Well, I'm not saying there is a lesser newspaper or media house, but there are two main newspapers which were top news. That was very important because of that political goodwill. So it requires, various strategies. How do we ensure that we attract political leadership so they can pick this, mainstream it in ministries, so that it becomes an agricultural issue, so that it becomes a water issue. When there is drought, that we understand that these are manifestations of climate crisis. When there are those floods which swept the people away, is it about the changing climate? So how do we connect that? And I saw there was that deliberate effort to do that. In the past, we were not talking about climate change. We were talking about really droughts without knowing that these are the impacts of climate change. So these are some of the things we need really to demystify. When I was coming, Rosalia called me to this meeting. I asked her, what mode do you want me to use in the presentation? So she told, just talk. It's not about a PowerPoint presentation because we are tired of that. It's just, how do we make this thing? How do we do this conversation? It's an exchange. How do we educate each other? How do we learn from each other? But more importantly, how are our journalists going to make it work? The editors are very important because they make decisions. Just a correspondent, we are going to invite him or her into our meeting, but the following day we ask, where did the story go? But because the editors who make the decision in the media houses did not find value in this, it is just relegated or it dies there. So by involving for a long time Joe Ageyo, now he's the chief editor-in-chief at Nation. You can see how the Nation has changed. We have a desk, a full desk on climate change and sustainability at the media house. Is because really the leadership, he has been able to inject that leadership into the discussions and in reporting, because he finds it very important. And this is actually learning from even the North. Climate change is a serious issue. The Guardian, among other newspapers, have been able to shape narratives within media houses and even outside in such a way that some are becoming even the dictionary vocabularies out of what they have done. He has talked about this, is it reparation, is climate change about end, and all those. How are we going to ensure that it works that way? But what about in Africa, where the problem really persists? You know, we have the discourse on climate justice, for instance. For us in Africa, we are really quite concerned that we are borrowing. It is really northern driven, because we just cut and paste the definition on climate justice, reparation, climate finance, and others, and just cut and paste into our discourses, where it has a problem of even internalizing. Because why? The context, the way the North, the way the UK understands climate change, for instance, climate justice, is not the way we understand it. For us, it's about reparation. For us, it's about really improving and enhancing the voices of the communities at the front line. That's smallholder farmers. How do they perceive climate change? Those are about fisherfolk in Lake Victoria. That's about our young people. That's about women at very local level. By the way, it is women who are providers at household level in our. So how do they perceive? So you cut and paste what a mother in UK is doing, because they are also only used to snow, and then you come and paste it in our context. It can't work. Is one day somebody was a researcher came. He was doing a research in Northeastern, and because the livestock industry is industrial in UK, he found in Northeastern that you have got a lot of cows, so you have to cull many animals, kill them to address climate change. You know, it is because he is just cutting the context there and coming to paste it. He doesn't know that in fact that old man in Northeastern, naturally his cows are dying every time because of drought. So you come and tell him, no, we need to, because we need to address climate change to kill your livestock, whereas that is done even naturally. You know, it's like an insult. It's because of cutting that narrative. So we need our journalists to weave around those narratives, which African narratives of some of these very important concepts: climate crisis, reparation when we talk about it, and all those. That is, we are not lazy. I believe that with the right support, with the right collaboration, building that synergy between, like this platform, the government, and the civil society, we can be able to do that. And you don't need to go far again. In Kenya, we are the pace setters in all this discourse. We may differ with Ambassador Ali in some things. We don't need to agree. But at one point, we converge and say, this is about us, and this is about Africa. And that's actually the beauty in our democracy in this country. We have the leadership, which we differ every time in Africa. But at the end of the day, we know what it takes for Africa and the victories which we have. And that's why I don't want to repeat what happened because Ambassador will talk about that, the Baku. But it was, of course, disappointing. But there were some little victories here and there we kept fight. Baku and many, and of course, some were in Dubai, in UNCCD, the certification conference, and there were those who went to the other UN Convention on Biodiversity. These are multilateral processes, and they are connected to each other. And so what we have to understand, the multilateral processes are very important for us in Africa. So many people ask, why should we go then when we don't get what we want? But you have to understand, by coming together, Kenya, Uganda, Zambia, Morocco, and those others, as a unit, you know, that is the only strength which we can have. And that's what we do even at the civil society level. It is a multilateral process that saves us, because We are a weak country. We rely on those, just imagine, a bilateral engagement with our partner who is more, it is those who has power, who are going to have that leverage. And that's why we take these multilateral processes very important, because that is where we have leverage as the groups of African group, as G77 and China, and those others whose more countries we band together. So that unity is very important. So whether it is the concept of climate justice, just transition, and those others, the discourse on climate change is a development discourse. It is not a weather, it's not a meteorological issue. No, we departed that long time ago. Look at our NDCs. What does it talk about? National determined contribution. We require 6 trillion Kenya shillings to meet our NDC's requirements as per Paris Agreement commitment. But where are we going to get that money? It is from those countries. Are we going to get it? Joe Ageyo has talked about $100 billion US, which if you go to OECD records, they are saying they delivered. But Odengo, did you see that money? We have never seen it. So where is the money? That's the biggest now problem which we have. How do we take charge of our, destiny? We don't go there for charity. It is for the industrialized countries. That's the imperative of climate justice, that you caused this problem and you cannot transfer the burden of action to the people who are suffering the impact of your actions. That is what is called climate justice. And so, we as PAGA will continue to support journalists, to work with journalists, and we have done that. We have a media scheme, a journalist scheme, called Africa Climate Change and Environmental Reporting Awards. It is this year, in September, we had the 8th edition since 2013. We want to explore these opportunities because it is those incentives which encourage younger journalists to come together so that we interest them as even part of this conversation. If you go to the north, people are specializing on climate change, various dimensions of climate change. There are those who are specializing in climate health, agriculture. It is an examinable subject. And so we are just there. And by the end of the day, you find consultants from the north. They are packaged, they are people, they are packaged, they are journalists, they have trained them, and you find them, they are the ones who are doing what you are supposed to do. They are climate finance experts. Even now, Odengo requires so many experts to do climate finance. The office of the ambassador, and so forth. Even our own office. Sometimes we look for people even who are experienced on that. We don't get them. So there are a lot of opportunities. So let us take this as one of the most topical issues in the world now, and we take you and seize the moment so that we are going to be extending this through the South-South, North-South collaboration of our journalists. So we extend the knowledge not only in the Kenyan journalists, but also within our own in the north and in the south. It's not necessary that every time we are recipients. Let us receive support, financial support from GIZ, from those, but not technical. Technical, we can transfer. We are technical enough. Because sometimes, you see, I become so agitated. When you find, within a short time, somebody from UK comes. This is a young person of 20 years or 25. He comes to intern at PAGA. Within 1 year, he goes back and becomes an expert now to teach Mithika what is climate change. Yeah, technical assistant. They come there now. There's a person who came and I trained this fellow. Now, because they have money, they come now, they are transferred, they are sent here to advise, not to advise. Yeah, to train me now. Surely. How do you train a trainer? You see? So these are the things, and I'm very happy the KEG is really taking this move. I think we've become encouraged when we find you doing this, because this is what we have really been encouraging the journalists in Kenya, media houses, networks, and those others. That has been the missing link. In Manzoni, we have people from deep grassroots, 46 counties, representatives elected by 7,093 from the counties. So every county, the voices, because that was what has been the problem we have been having, that who truly represents the civil society. And so it was a very painful process by Flocker, and we have really supported it to ensure that let us have the people. This is because the discourse has been happening at national level, the further international, continental, and national. So we want to trickle down so that it is driven by the people. So we hope that with our local language, I hope the guild has also the editors from local language, because that is really causing a lot of ripples. The transformation is not happening in Nairobi. It is happening at local level. So I would want to see a Somali network, local language, really here in this, a Kimeru, a Maasai, all those, they are doing very well. In fact, now, it is not about the national level. We understand at our level. But how do we talk climate change and those changes, the disappearing rivers, the shifting seasons, and so forth at local level? That is where we need to connect. So with those few remarks, ladies and gentlemen, let me say that we express commitment. We look forward to working with you, but let us not be, this meeting be an episode. We have been told episodic. Let us make it a process. How do we continue with these conversations? I'm very happy you have published books, but that is not enough. Let us do more than that. To instill this and internalize this at very local level, we initiated the Nairobi Summer School on Climate Justice for young people that 5 years and below. We are very happy that these are the young people who are innovators at the local level. They are the ones who are even reporters here, some of them. They were local reporters, now they are starting their careers. Some of them are even joining the negotiations. They are the negotiators who will succeed us. So that through that, we have that critical mass of people who are knowledgeable. Because if you don't train them and they are not knowledgeable, then they are going to articulate the narratives from wherever they Google them, which are going to be very dangerous, and then it is not going to be helpful. So it is a multi-pronged process. How do we train journalists, but more importantly, who are they going to be interacting with? So thank you very much, and we look forward for this discussion.
Asante sana, thank you very much. You can always be assured, and I think you've forgotten your notes, you can always be assured that there will be fireworks and a lot of questions about the climate justice imperative when you give the microphone to Dr. Mwenda. But he's given us a few insights into what we as journalists should be doing and as communicators in this space should be doing. And I'll just mention a few. First, he has told us to grab the opportunity. Grab the opportunity to tell this story and to be the next big thing in this space. And I think on that note, I would like to recognize the presence of university students in our midst, whom I believe will be the next big names and the next big things in this climate space. If you're here, you're a university student, simama, so that we give you a hearty clap. Those are the university students. Note them, note their faces. Soon they are going to be the next big things in this climate conversation space. Let me briefly summarize Dr. Mwenda's really powerful remarks. The first one, he talks about making the human connections in our climate change reporting. And he asks us whether it's possible for us to see the connections between climate change and the health crisis that we face. I know we've been talking about, the emergence of diseases of zoonotic origin, COVID-19 and all these others. I think there is an ongoing major health scare in the Congo that is suspected to be as a result of zoonotic origin. The interactions between humans, animals, and the environment. That is a major crisis, and we know for sure, because science is telling us so, that these things, this crisis, these health emergencies are going to be with us and are going to be more regular for a very long time. He also asks, as part of making these human connections, whether we can look at agriculture and how it has been affected by climate change as one of the things that we need to be talking about. And infrastructure and finance, when you do not have money in your pocket, do you blame it on the economy? And if it's on the economy, how is that economy affected by climate change? Can you find the connections? Can you connect the dots and see how one influences the other? Then he asked the question whether it has to be sensational. And he gave an example of a story that was published when we were in Baku. And I remember asking, I can't see him here, and I remember asking him, was it the only story that you could see? Was it, there are many other stories, yeah? Are you suffering? Do you need help? But according to Dr. Mwenda, it was a good story. I disagreed with him, and he disagreed with me, but eventually we came to an understanding and we moved forward. Dr. Mwendo has also told us that there is an opportunity for us to shape powerful narratives and see the opportunities in the crisis. I don't know whether you remember that when we first started reporting climate change, we only looked at it as a crisis. As a crisis. It's affecting our lives and our livelihoods. And so our approach to it was only that, a crisis. Catastrophe, nothing else. But now I think that narrative, that posture of our journalism is changing, and we are looking at it as an opportunity. And actually that's part, if you reported the Africa Climate Summit, the first Africa Climate Summit, and the Nairobi Declaration actually talks about the climate crisis being an opportunity and asked us, not just as Kenyans and journalists, but as Africans, to look at the opportunities that come with the crisis. And what are those opportunities? You've seen a lot. If you follow the discussions on Article 6 and carbon markets, there are people who are making money out of it, as other people are complaining about climate change. Smart agriculture, there are opportunities there, and I know a lot of people are innovating in that space. E-mobility, we've seen them. We've seen, electric motorcycles. We've seen electric cars. E-mobility is the next big thing, and I think it's part of our adaptation plans. So looking at these things, and so that when we are reporting about climate change, you're not just thinking about the weather. You can see everything. Transport is affected, but what are the opportunities there? What are the emerging trends? Agriculture and so on and so forth. And on that note, I would like to bring in Mr. Moneybags, the man who says he has the money. I hope he is paying for our lunch. Mr. Peter Odengo is Senior Advisor, Climate Change at the National Treasury. Karibu sana, Mr. Moneybags.
First of all, don't go. How many editors are here? Editors, real editors. I know there are some. So this is my speech. I will leave this speech for you. You are one. And you. I'll leave this one. So I will want you to construct a story of the money back. This is it. I'll leave it here. The way it is, there is nothing. Ladies and gentlemen, the team, and let me recognize the presence of Ambassador Ali Mohamed, my boss. Please feel welcome. We were warming the seat before you came. Let me also take this opportunity to thank the president. I call you Presido. I don't know which language is that of the Editors Guild. I was with you 1 year and a few months ago, and it was that tough talk that I asked you to come for the money, me. And I've never got any call until 2 days ago when I saw an email from the club. But the person who did it seemed that I know the guy, and it was you. And how long did it take for me to say yes? I last second, and he could not believe that the money bank can respond to this. One thing which I will tell you in no uncertain, that there is money and I have it. And the only problem you will not read in the heads of newspapers. You will read the people who are throwing stones. In the headline of tomorrow, Ambassador, envoy, you will read, Odengo dismissed some people. But I say, I am the money bag, but my money the money is not me, the money is with your grandmother. And when I ask you, I ask people, which ward are you coming from? They don't know. How many people know their ward? Please don't carry your hand. If you don't know, just keep quiet. Thank you very much. I know my ward. It is Koloa East ward, and I participate in the participatory climate risk assessment because climate finance is available, but it has been transmitted to my grandmother, and it is in the village. If you remain elite, you will remain elite, and you will be distinct. You will be extinct in the next 10 years. And to confirm that you are going to be extinct in the next 10 years, you are in a Nairobi County, which has not met the minimum, which just met the minimum condition to access FLOCA, financing locally led climate action, FLOCA money 2 months ago. And they have missed several millions of shillings today. That's why you are here, because you are dying. You are suffering not because there is no money, because you don't go to the Nairobi, the local, even Kawangware slums, to tell them your money is lying in the National Treasury with a gentleman called Peter Oluoch Odengo, who is saying the truth, but is not a truthful man. You know, there are two different things.
Yes.
There are two different things. I say the truth, but I'm not a truthful man. See, that is a good story. So, the story of climate finance is long and dwindling. But the challenge of reporting it is also as difficult as seeing the kingdom of God. Millions of years ago in 1962, I was just a journalist called Rachel Carson in the United States of America. A journalist, he was just a storyteller. It is that Rachel Carson that wrote a very simple book, The Iron in the Stream. And that book was just telling you how the persistent organic pops in chemicals could be seen in areas where local communities have never used those pesticides. And she watched how birds and fish were dying along the Mississippi River or somewhere. Then she took just a challenge to herself. She was working in Environment Protection Agency, a journalist, a storyteller. You can Google, I know you are Google people. That simple story is what has now made us to date. Because the chemicals that were being used were used as a result of the Americans who decided to eat and live bigger and use everything possible because they had money. Today, we are here with very educated editors. Very educated editors. With now TikToks, WhatsApp, real time, but cannot write that there is a program in the Republic of Kenya called Financing Locally Led Climate Action, FLOCA, which has mobilized $295 million. And that money has already gone into 1,450 wards. And for that money to reach, that program, which is a Kenya government program, has transformed the landscape, has transformed the continent, and people are flocking into this republic to see how local framework works. No story at all, because the editors are waiting for people who are fighting. Or they are waiting for the big rallies to say, "Hey, Mlembe Showa." How many Mlembes are here? When I say Mulembe Shua, you say Shua Shua. Mulembe Shua. But that one you will see. If you are in Western, you will see Mulembe Shua Shua. But now, while they are saying Shua, they don't know that their country is misusing the money that has been mobilized. They don't know, and they don't write. And the money is supposed to be financing 4 things. 1, water. Is water not a climate change issue? Number 2, restoration of degraded landscapes and ecosystems, where the trees, 100 billion trees, take the headline, but it is a part of the ecosystem. Number 3, climate smart agriculture, disaster risk management, and also capacity building, both at national up to local level village. When we fail, and when we keep on complaining that when we were in Baku, no, the Baku story was that we were suffering, sir, and it is true we were suffering, but when the gentleman wrote the story, we were waiting for the food aid. You know, Molio. We were waiting for food aid to come to Kenyans who were suffering in Baku, but we never saw anything. But the story was very good. The other time, there was a story that Kenya has taken the largest delegation in Dubai, even bigger than the Americans who are giving us money. Very good. But do you know the Americans are not giving us any money in climate change? Are you aware of that? Are you aware? There is no support. Any money you get from the Americans is business. And you never reported that. And if you think that Peter Odengo is lying, go and look at the WASH program. Under the USAID. It started in the 1970s. We are still washing because there is no money there. It is now for local to come and provide money at the local level. The water at the doorstep, which was promised in 1985, has never reached because it is a wash thing. Now, wash thing, wash. Now, wash which is washing is not meant. But the gentlemen who are innovative looking for gold from Congo is now the one who are being rebuked. Why can't you rebuke the others? Because a wash is a wash. It is because you are also washed by the Western ideologies that whatever is a wash in the Western is very good. But any wash which is helping that gentleman who have got no job is a very bad wash. So today, I am very happy that you called us again to come and have a narrative. But the only thing that, when we talked tough the other time, it took 14 months to come back again here. The money is available, but it is not enough. And when you look at the flow of climate finance, and what is climate finance? Climate finance is that money which is dedicated over and above to finance climate change issues and to build the local resilience, because we're already living in a warmer earth. When you're already living in a warmer earth, it means you need more water is evaporating to the atmosphere. But when you rain the water cycle, then you must have a catchment and forest for that water to go back to come. But because you have already cut all the forests, all the trees, now it goes to the space. So there is no water in the rivers. The ecosystem is destroyed. You lack water. So climate finance is to get you that will now make us to survive. And within the climate discourse, there are 2 types of what we respond: mitigation and adaptation. When Medeka, my friend, is talking climate justice, he talks climate justice so that everybody can get a light. But Peter Odengo talks for climate justice so that my grandmother can get food, water, build a resilient household, educate her child, have good food through climate smart agriculture, and of course add to light so that insects cannot disturb my grandmother in the house. You know, if you have light without food, then mosquitoes come in and give you another disease. No, that malaria caused by your light without the support is now climate-related, climate disease. Ladies and gentlemen, getting the climate finance is not a walk in the park. is not a walk in the park. The money which is promised, if you look at this financial mechanism, Jeff, the first fund which was established in 1992 was Jeff, Global Environment Facility. Global Environment Facility was made because of the chaos and the damage and the cries of the developing country that they were not getting enough. That is 1992 or the year there. Then after that, now we came up with the Kyoto Protocol, which also established clean development mechanism, it has been said. We moved until now the GCF, which was committing 11 billion, which they had in the first replenishment. Then the second one was about 9. Then the third one is now about 13. So when you look at that, from the Cancun of 2010 to where now we are in 2024, the climate finance, which is now being mobilized from that main institution, has been declining. Now, if it has been declining, and it is true, climate change is no longer a weather or any technical statement. It is now developmental. Now, if it is developmental, so it means that you have to build resilient buildings, resilient railways, resilient water system, resilient agricultural system, resilient roads, resilient bridges, and resilient food. Then, and where should that one come? If you look at the global promises and the flow is declining. The demand of 1.3 trillion, which we wanted which we have been fighting for to have during the new collective quantifiable goal, was 1.3 trillion. But the convention is very clear. The money should come from developed country parties to support developing country parties to respond to the impact of climate change. But they are saying, these guys are very disorganized. They say these guys are very disorganized. If they cannot they cannot even account for the 100 billion we gave them. Some say, so we got 200. They are saying we have already given you, and we are there. That's why. So is that confusing? They say, first of all, there is no 1.3 trillion to do what? They ask you to do what? But you say, look at the impacts. It is known. It is happening. But because you are not reporting the imperative of why the developed countries are supposed to provide resources, and climate to provide that money, make it easy to access, and ensure that there is increased mobilization. Now, for the Green Climate Fund, it was in your statement, for you to get money from Green Climate Fund, you need a period of minimum of 3 to 5 years. A poor person, how long will you wait? But even that, you need to invest between $500,000 to something, but you will get it anyway. So you have team. You have a lot to do. You need to report climate finance. We have GIF locker alone. We are mobilizing 1 billion. We have already mobilized 295 million US dollars as we are sitting now. Of that, 110 million has already been dispersed. The total amount that we have given to the local communities in this Republic of Kenya is 12.68 billion. And I challenge you to go to your ward and your county. You are storytellers. Ask your governor. Bungoma, about 380 million. Kakamega is about 400 million. My Kisumu is about 260. Sir, in Wajir, doing very well, is about 180. The figures, I can give you the figures, but there is no county. The county that has got a little is the minimum that we have given is 70 million. And they got it there. And you people, nobody has even taken a pen even to report that on the headline. And it is money that we have mobilized. The National Treasury Ambassador is fighting for more money to bring. Then Guardian comes with a small tokenism of the UK or whatever provided. Then they run to the leaders and we sign fake contracts for the carbon credit. The carbon credit that you are capturing what you don't understand. Yes, carbon credit is not an art of drawing. It is science. And you need And we have experts in this country. Kenya is leading in this Africa with the carbon credit, right from the clean development mechanism. And the number of projects that have been already submitted and in the registry of the CDM board. If by 2010 they were 19, today they must be over 30. And of course, we have got carbon credit. But the challenge is, because of lack of information, people woke up, confuse the people, particularly in the rangeland, to come up with conservancies, and people who are not learned are forced to sign papers which they did not read. And you, the Editors Guild, are here and clapping for the people that are big money signed in the northern or something. I don't want to mention the name. And then you clap to them that they brought in big money. And your grandmother is only entitled to about a peanut, and she will never use that land for a period of 21 years. And the money comes. So now we cannot use that land for anything else. And she is being paid 1,000 at the end of the year after. Is it a good business? No. But why are you writing that Qatari came here with billions? Kenya is leading that. Did you know what is being written? Now, finally, I know the time is not on our side. I will call you again, and it will be my meeting. It will be. I will now invite you for my meeting, and it will be one meeting, one agenda, and we are starting monitoring you from now. And by February, Madam President, it is my meeting, not your meeting, because we need you, you need us. How many people are going to write something tomorrow? Bridge collapsing, yet the money is there, nobody is writing it. So, one, you will not see the kingdom of God as editors. Yes. I'm not cursing you, and you are in the right track. Now, if you could continue like this, but if you change, you will see the kingdom of God. And what is that change? Please, we have a promise. He who will not put anything on climate change on its top line, or anything, whether negative or whether we were just quarreling about climate finance. So help me God. So thank you very much. It is great to be with you. I'm handing this thing, so I'm waiting a story from this.
Asante sana. After looking at that piece of paper, I'm not sure